Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here and just stumbled across my channel, I'm Allie, and today I'm going to be doing a little taste test on Catriona Ward's books. I originally was doing 3 books by, and then I would have a certain author that I was reading their books, kind of the same vibe, kind of the same like taste testing authors' works and that type of ordeal. And I'm still kind of sticking to the concept, but I've realized that there's some authors that I have read maybe 1 or 2 books from, but it's been a really long time ago, and I want to be able to feature them in a way that I can still taste test, do a little like, you know, vibe check on their work, but it not necessarily have to be 3 books, or it doesn't necessarily have to be the first 3 that I've originally read, you know? But I will be highlighting these authors in these videos still the same way I did in that one, and also going to be sticking strictly to their work and at least reading 2, 3 of their books, giving you guys reviews and telling you guys about any of the past books I've read from them too. But this one is kind of a typical 3 books by, because I am just now reading them, so it's going to be more current. I'm going to have reviews for all of them. I have had Catriona Ward on my radar for the past like 2 or 3 years. I literally have her books marked on my Goodreads as want to read, and I looked at the dates today and I was like, oh my gosh, I have put these off for far too long, and one of them was Sundial. I did just recently read this. I think it was actually part of my Halloween-a-thon. All Rob wanted was a normal life. She almost got it too. A husband, 2 kids, a nice house in the suburbs, but Rob fears for her oldest daughter, Callie, who collects tiny bones and whispers to imaginary friends. Rob sees a darkness in Callie, one that reminds her too much of the family she left behind. She decides to take Callie back to her childhood home to Sundial, deep in the Mojave Desert, and there she will have to make a terrible choice. Callie is worried about her mother, Rob. Rob has begun to look at her strangely and speaks of past secrets. Callie fears that only one of them will leave Sundial alive. The mother and daughter embark on a dark desert journey to the past in the hopes of redeeming their future. I'm making progress on Sundial. I'm like zooming through this, you guys. I am over halfway through already and loving it. I know I didn't, well, I say loving it. I'm having a hard time with it. I feel like going from Pet Cemetery to this is a super heavy video, and I apologize. Like, I'm just reading super heavy books. Yeah, it's just really heavy. We have this like dynamic that it's kind of reminding me of my husband, where she's not obsessed with her husband, but there is this like link with them that like there's something going on. There's something further going on, because she's not leaving him. She knows that he's cheating on her. Literally the very first line in the book is, "It's the chicken pox that makes me sure my husband is having another affair." So their younger daughter, Annie, has chicken pox, and so does the neighbor kids, who Rob has kept away from, and Rob is the mom. She's kept her kids away from them, and it's her first clue that her husband's having another affair with that family's mom, and that is how the chicken pox got from that family to this family. And it's just like gut-wrenching. It's heartbreaking. They just treat each other so sadly, especially him to her, but like Rob, the mom, is just so weird too. And now we're starting to kind of learn about her childhood, and it was almost kind of like cult-like and just weird, and I don't know. I feel like it's gonna really go there with the end. Like, I feel like I could either probably land at like a 4 and be like, this was a super interesting read, or it's gonna do something like mind-blowingly wild and it's gonna be a 5-star. That's kind of where I'm at. Rob is struggling with having, she's just kind of a weird mother too, because it is full-on favoritism. The dad favors one kid and then she favors the other, and the one that the dad favors is her like creepy kid who apparently, from the sound of it, has like taken animals carcasses and like is cleaning them in her bedroom, and Rob has had enough, and she's like, okay, I'm taking my daughter back to where my childhood was at, and I'm teaching her about it. And we're kind of trying to figure out and get into this mom's brain of like what she's trying to do. Like, what is her game plan here? Because she seems so sure of herself and like she knows what she's doing. We're like, what are you doing? She wants a better life for her and her kids. She wants to be able to have that life for both of her kids, but she's also being really shady, and we're getting kind of just this weird narrative point from her of like, what's the right word? I guess just not reliable. And then it goes to Callie, her preteen daughter, who is, you know, her creepy one that likes bones. That she's taking with her, and she's starting to get it in her head with her like other voices that are in her head that her mom is taking her out to this desert to her and to not bring her back home with them because she just favors the other daughter. And Rob starts telling her the story of like her childhood, and it's like, just what? Anyways, I'm rather enjoying myself. Sundial was quite the journey. I liked it. I can say some parts felt too easy, some parts felt very predictable. But like Stephen King said, I feel like there is a portion at the end where you're just like what? But overall, the journey getting there was so much fun because I just kept thinking, this is not going to be an author for me. Not because I don't like her writing. I really like her writing. What it came down to is the characters. I was like, I don't understand these characters. I don't understand why they're making these choices and doing these things. And like, I think I briefly touched on it in the last part, like, why is this lady with her husband? And like, you know, different things like that. Certain things about her family and almost feeling like she's like living like this cult. So I'm just like, is she in a cult? Is she not? There's just so many questions up in the air until the end. And I feel like this works for me because it's an author that's going to wrap everything up in the end. She's going to like really flesh out the story towards the end so that it all pulls together and makes sense to the reader. And I love that. It was unhinged. It was quite the ride and just super unlikable characters, but at the same time, just so many cool aspects of a story that I definitely see why people say this is kind of like a thriller versus horror, but at the same time, it has those horror elements of it with just all the dark stuff that's like kind of wrapped up in between this family and also kind of a almost like paranormal aspect to it. I really liked it. I enjoyed this so much, but at the same time, I was so grossed out by so many elements of it. But what really struck me right away with her writing style and the overall story and where she went with it was just how unique it was. It definitely has horror elements. It's categorized as horror. I would put it in horror. But at the same time, it reads like a thriller. There's mystery points to it, and it's the first time in a really long time that I was excited and like really enjoying myself with a thriller. That's what it felt like to me. So I would also categorize it as just like a dark thriller also. I feel like it's going to be super repetitive. I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record here when saying I have to be super vague with Catriona Ward's work because I feel like the more blindly you go into her books, the better, like the best outcome. But with saying that, I also have to say that I find her work super confusing. And in the best way because it all wraps up in the end. But when I tell you, it is just very confusing to me. Kept wondering what was going on. I kept trying to piece it together. And finally I was like, you know what? I'm just here for the ride. I don't really care at this point. Like, I'm enjoying it, but I'm not going to invest myself that hard in this because this is hurting my brain. And just kind of let the story take me from there. I did land at 5 stars with this one, and this sparked my interest in reading more of her stories because I just want to know if her work is continuously super unique, continuously super strange, and just so gross at times and so jarring. and just very different. So that is what I'm excited to see for the rest of this video. And this isn't going to be a typical vlog because I'm not going to have a lot of B-roll for you guys, let's be real. I feel like right now it's holiday time. I'm trying to like fit in all of my end of the year reads, and I'm juggling so many video concepts and ideas right now and filming them. And so I am going to stay true to my 3 books by series with this video by just jumping book to book. But I will have other vlogs with B-roll and maybe a little bit more exciting things to them besides just book reviews. But hopefully if you're here, you've come for the book reviews. Because today I jumped into The Last House on Needless Street. I believe this one came out, I could be wrong, but I want to say that this one came out maybe a year before Sundial. I was actually correct on that. I don't know how I really know that, but Sundial was 2022 and this one is 2021. Also, shout out to my library. This is your reminder to utilize your libraries because they are super important and super great. In a boarded up house on the dead-end street of the edge of the wild Washington woods lives a family of 3. A teenage girl who isn't allowed outside, not after last time. A man who drinks alone in front of his TV trying to ignore the gaps in his memory, and a house cat who loves napping and reading the Bible. An unspeakable secret binds them together, but when a new neighbor moves in next door, what is buried among the birch trees may come back to haunt them all. I dived into this one today and can stand on the same ground of saying I'm just as confused, just as jarred as I was reading Sundial. So not a whole lot has changed there, but what I will say with this one, staying as non-spoilery as possible, is that I feel like this one is going to be much more predictable, and like I'm having a hard time with this because I'm like, okay, but I thought that with Sundial. And I kept being wrong, or she kept kind of doing those little twists where she would throw in a twist and I'd be like, oh, so it was that, I was completely off. Or maybe I was going on the right path with one of my predictions, but then she would throw in another twist and I'd be like, okay, but I didn't see that coming. So I'm wondering if that's gonna happen with this one, but I have my theories. And so far, it's kind of like all adding up. I feel like she's going to mess me up in the end though. I feel like there's going to be twist after twist and the story's gonna just unravel into, honestly, a hot mess that's good. I just don't know how to explain her work. It's so unique to me that I've just never read anything like this, but I have to say that this is the type of books that I feel like I'm gonna have to be in the mood for, because it really takes a lot of concentration and you're still going to be confused. So many reviews I've seen of people just being like, I feel like I'm not smart enough for her books, and while I doubt that, I feel like anybody can pick up these books and gather it in the end. You just have to stick with it. But I agree when it comes to, you really have to focus in and you have to really set your mind to it to figure out what all is going on. I almost feel like these are types of books where I typically wouldn't reread them because I don't really reread thrillers. But at the same time, because I mean, you know what happens. But I feel like she writes them in such a way of being so confusing that I feel like a second read through, you'd be like, oh, that's why she did that. And that's why, and I think it would piece it all together a lot better for you. Anyways, I'm working on this one. I have taken some notes. My first note was, because I was like, I need to be detailed in my notes because I'm reading so much right now. But my first note for this one was literally like, what the is going on? One thing that I have to say I don't like so far is the fact that there is a cat character. You can see little cat sitting right here, super cute, little black cat. And she keeps saying things, and when she gets frustrated, she says GD a lot. And that's really irritating me. And you might think that I'm meaning like she's actually saying goddamn. No, she says GD, like quote, GD. For an example, I wrote down this sentence, quote, what a GD help you are, end quote. And it's just like, there is a little bit of, I don't know know if this is going to go into any more religious, because it's not really feeling religious heavy or anything, but there has been a couple mentions of God. So I don't know if this is just the cat's like workaround to not say. I feel like it's the same thing. It's just in a more like kind of annoying way, unless I'm just completely off with that so far. But I was just like, I don't understand why they keep saying GD. And it's only like when she's really frustrated and mad, so I feel like that's what she's referring to, but it's just so repetitive, and it's just kind of one of those things that's starting to like put me off. Every time she says it, I'm like, ugh. It's like they let their breath go, or they didn't realize they were holding their breath in for so long. It's those repetitive things. It's giving me that type of vibe. But I'm going to wrap this up because I am rather far into it. I don't have very much left. And I will come back and let you guys know how I feel about it, because I do need to jump into my next one rather quickly. So it's probably going to be a quick video for you today.
Be quiet, look at me, there I go, choking on my silence. And I don't think you want me cause I want to keep it private. And I don't think you know me if you're not one of my 5 friends, but... Okay,
so quick minute with you guys, because I have finished The Last House on Needless Street, and I forgot to update you, and now I'm about to take it back to the library and pick up my holds. December is going to be a wild month. I'm not ready. But we are getting our Christmas trees up, so I thought I would be able to start using it in some of my videos, although I'm not sure when exactly this video is going up. But I have finished, and I'm left speechless once again. It's so unique, so different, so jarring, so twisty, and the turns, and honestly mind blown with another one of hers. But I will say this was a solid 4 for most of the way through, because I just felt like I was guessing and figuring it out. Some I was way off, but some of it I was a little bit more spot on than what I thought I was going to be in the end. But the last 100-ish pages or so was just mind-blowing to me, and I loved what this involves story-wise, which I can't say because it gives way too much away. I will just say that she treaded so lightly and beautifully with it and really made a beautiful story out of this, and the way that she went about it I feel like was just perfect. I loved everything that the last part of this book had to say about it. Definitely don't skip the author's note at the end either, where she kind of spoils the book there, but goes into depth of like why this book came to be and everything. All of it was just so beautiful. Although it is a very dark and jarring story, but I feel like as a whole, plot-wise and where it went, it's not super unique. I feel like we've gotten these types of plots and twists and turns in movies and other books. So I still was landing at a 4, but the last bits of it and some of the stuff that was mentioned, some of the stuff that was done in the story did change my mind, and I am landing at another 5-star for Catriona Ward. I feel like this one is not as high as Sundial. I think Sundial just blew me away a lot more because it was just not the type of story I think I would typically like. I would read it because it's horror, but it wouldn't be high on my list of what I like. But the way she did it was just so different and weird that it just worked for me. I feel the same with this one, but I don't know. Like I said, I can't really say too much because it spoils way too much. So I did write down my little thought process throughout. So the first, let's say, quarter of the book, pure confusion once again, like I mentioned earlier. Halfway through, I was confident I'd figured it out. I was like, okay, I know where this story is going. 3/4 of the way, I was back to confusion because while some of what I thought was going on was, there was definitely twists and turns that were making me question everything. It wasn't really what I was expecting, not really what I was hoping for either, but with the ending, the way she wrapped it all up, left me with a 5-star. Like, I felt like she did it great. Although it may not be a super, super unique concept, I feel like she did it amazingly. I absolutely loved. She definitely made it a concept that may be already used, unique enough to impress me. So, another 5-star. And if you're wondering, I am now going on to Looking Glass Sound, which I actually own, so I'll be able to take my time with this maybe. But I do have the audiobook on Libby, so I might have to do fast turnaround time with this one to fit it in time if I enjoy the audiobook. But I'm excited to jump into another one. I have no idea what to expect though.
I can't give in, I have to go. Stuck up on the top, interest in my grab though. Too many
And I have finished my last Catriona Ward book, at least for this video. But first, I want to review it. This is Looking Glass Sound. I don't even know if I read you guys the synopsis in the last clip. In a cottage overlooking the windswept Maine coast, Wilder Harlow has begun the last book he will ever write. It is the story about the sun-drenched summer days of his youth in Whistler Bay and the blood-stained path of the killer that stalked his small vacation town, about the terrible secret he and his companions, Nat and Harper, discovered entombed in the coves off the bay, and how the past they swore that day echoed down the decades, forever shaping their lives. But the more Wilder writes, the less he trusts himself in his memory. He starts to see things that can't be real, notes hidden in the cottage from an old friend now dead, a woman with dark hair drowning in the icy waters below, calling for help, entire chapters he doesn't recall typing, appearing overnight. Who or what is haunting Wilder? No longer able to trust his own eyes, Wilder begins to fear that this will not only be his last book, but the last thing he ever does. Catriona Ward has done it again for me. She has confused the hell out of me. She has made my brain hurt. And she also has delivered another very unique, thrilling story. I say thrilling, but I will tell you right now, do not let this be your first Catriona Ward, because my God, is the beginning so slow. But I rather enjoyed the beginning. I feel like that might be a hot take because I've seen a lot of people really say, I couldn't do this, I DNF'd, it's so slow. But for me, I actually was really enjoying the story. And I don't know if it's because I've been reading Catriona Ward back to back that I'm like, my brain, my mind needs a break. But the slow burn at the beginning of this book just really did it for me. Her writing is so unique and fun and just so different that I just really, really enjoyed that. But it once again does pick up and does feel thrillery. Maybe not as much as The Last House on Needless Street or Sundial, but it does still have those type of thriller mystery vibes, horror mystery, horror thriller vibes. It's confusing as hell and just as unique as confusing. We have a book within a book, and that just escalates and just speed runs into so much that I feel like even if I had a spoiler section, my brain would be so confusing to be able to tell you even half of what's going on in this book. It is definitely a you have to experience it for yourself type of book. I feel like it's great for discussion. I would absolutely love to sit down and pick somebody else's brain and talk about this book and figure it all out. It's definitely a book where you want to pick it back up and reread it down the line to just try to put together more of the puzzle pieces. I'm sure there's so much that like my brain could not handle and just slipped right by me the first read, because it's not until I feel like you're 50% or over that you're starting to piece together so much that's going on in the story. And at the same time, it's so confusing that you're like, is it that though? Or is it this? Same thing. I feel like I'm a broken record with all of her books and what I'm explaining because I can't give anything away. Now that I'm onto my third book by Catriona Ward, I will say that I am seeing some repeats as far as like her writing style, some of the things she says. I believe it was The Last House on Needless Street, but it's also this one she used the term writing a grocery list, where there's two characters who are talking and the other one is writing something down, whether this is a therapist or a doctor or a police or whatever. They're writing almost like they're supposed to be taking a statement, but the character whose head we're in, they're barely writing anything. It's kind of like they're just writing their own personal grocery list. So I thought that was interesting because this was the second book that I've gotten that from her. With this one, I think I enjoyed the confusing bits a lot more than I did with my previous two books, because although I think part of it is thanks to the slow burn beginning, but the other part of it I think is I was waiting for the confusion to hit, because I was like, when confusion hits, I know that she's gonna wrap this up and it's gonna be so cool in the end. So I didn't mind it as much with this. And I think others, maybe taste testing her work would be best for you too, because I feel like after you get through a couple of hers, you'll kind of realize, okay, there is confusion, but with that, we do get answers, and it makes it a lot more enjoyable when you are so confused. Once again, the end did it for me, wrapped everything up the way that I needed it to. Yes, there is bits of this story that fell a little flat for me, but overall, all of the concepts, all of the hidden things in this, not to mention, we almost have a little bit of like House of Leaves, we used to live here, that type of vibe with these certain sections where we get, I was trying to see if I could flip to one, and I don't really want to show you guys the words, but it's just like a repeatedness of words. And so I was writing them down because I'm like, oh, I got to crack the code, and ended up being a lot more simpler than I thought. But I love aspects of that in books so much. I just think it adds so much to a thriller and mystery book. Yeah, another 5-star. The last thing I really want to say about this, first off, I can't say much more about this than the synopsis, and it's a book within a book, and you're gonna be confused, but just hold out, you'll get there. Once again, the characters are not that likable, but they're not terrible either. There might be boring bits, but I will say, again, don't let this be your first Catriona Ward. I definitely would say pick up any other, at least The Last House on Needless Street or Sundial, because those are two other ones that I've read and enjoyed. But I feel like if you read those first, you'll enjoy this one more than going into this and letting this one be your first Catriona Ward. Some things I want to mention that are super similar with her books is this super, I don't even want to say weird because that sounds so bad, but it's so unique and just different, her writing style. But I love it. I love it so much. I think that is honestly what does it for me with her books. I feel like if these stories, plots, twists, everything were written by somebody else, they would not be 5 stars. It really comes down to her writing for me. Every book is super confusing, but so far, the plots, the twist, the characters, their backstories, everything has been so unique, not repetitive in a way that I'm like, yeah, I read that in another story. They've all been so good in that sense, and I don't see that very often with thrillers. I love that there's horror elements to each one of these. There's moments that really grossed me out with each of these, and there's been body horror and just really gross scenes. Also some scenes that are a little bit more jarring that typically some people may not enjoy reading, but I had a rather good time cringing and just being like, oh my god, that's so gross, I love it. I did write down here, plots are interesting, twists are insane, and the ending always pulls it in and does it for me. There's so many moments with each of these that I was just like, I don't know, this might be a 4-star. Honestly, The Last House on Needless Street, I feel like is so many people's favorites, but in that book, there was so many moments where I was like, this feels kind of like a 3-star for me. And then towards the end, it got to like a 4-star, and then the ending, I was like 5 stars. So the endings really pull it all together for me, and she's really good at that, in my opinion. I know that it's not gonna work for everybody, but they do work for me. Each of them, I also have realized that her characters are not very likable for me. There's not a single character that I was really rooting for or like, well, I take that back. I think I had a little bit more of a connection with the characters in Sundial, the mom and daughter, than I did with any other characters in these books. But they're also, like, obviously there's characters in these that you're not gonna like, that you're not rooting for because, you know, their choices, but the characters we're supposed to like really be invested in and really root for, I didn't feel like a overly attachment to them, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And finally, I think I would just like to say that this is a really strange outro for me with this taste test of Catriona Ward, because I wouldn't call these all-time favorite books. I don't really call thrillers all-time favorite books, but for some reason, she just really makes it work and has wowed me enough to give 3 of her books 5 stars, which I know in these videos, I typically tend to have higher ratings than lower ratings, because I am kind of like hand-picking authors that maybe I've read one of their books and I'm like, okay, I want to read some more from them. And then a lot of the time it just really works out for me that I end up loving all of their books. But I was shocked that I ended up with 3 5 stars for sure. And with that being said, I have a new little thing to add to these videos where next year I really want to be invested in my TBR jar. Right now it's a mess. I only drew out of my TBR jar once. I will say it was a handful of little slips of paper that I drew out. So I did get to quite a few books that were in the jar, but I drew them all out at once and then I have not drawn from my TBR jar since. So in January, hopefully, you'll see a video of me doing a vlog involving my TBR jar, and maybe I'll talk more into that video about what I plan on doing with it in 2025. But for now, I just wanted to mention that if I enjoy the books that I read, the author and everything, and I could see myself reading more of their books from these videos, I'm going to add some of their other books, if not all of their other books that I haven't read, to my TBR jar. So for Catriona Ward, I can think of, I think, 2 off the top of my head, and Little Eve, I know, but the other one I had to look in her book, The Girl from Raw Blood. I've heard that they're both a little bit more horror and like historical fiction, but I actually think I will really enjoy that too, and I'm excited to see how different they are because people who have read all of them say that there is a difference between the 3 I read for this video and those 2. So I am going to be adding those 2 to my TBR jar, so stay tuned. You might see those in upcoming vlogs. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. I hope you guys enjoyed. If there's an author you would like me to taste test in the future, again, I read, for the most part, horror, so I usually try to stick with horror authors as much as possible. But I am willing to dabble into some other areas if it's intriguing enough. Maybe if it's fantasy, it has to be kind of a darker fantasy, maybe like dark academia, these sci-fi horror authors, that type of ordeal. But who knows, maybe I'll be inspired to branch out more next year and to read different genres than I did this year because it just wasn't the vibe this year. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you in my next video.
I never wanna show my face sometimes, and I got trouble looking people in the eye, 'cause when I do I just forget half. I wanna do it, I'ma feel like I'm